All right, so welcome everybody to today's workshop. Today we are going to be discussing the application and how to strengthen your UC application. In particular, we're going to be talking today about the extracurricular and award sections as well as the PIQ section of the application. The rest of the application is pretty self-explanatory. Unless you don't know your name, I really can't help you with that. But for the most part, that stuff should be pretty simple. Your coursework, your grades, everything that you're doing in terms of your respective colleges is also something that y'all control, and then any support that y'all need for your classes, for your courses, you get it through the college that you're currently attending right now. For today's workshop, we're really going to focus on the areas where you have a lot of control right now as a student when completing the application. And so again, your courses, your grades, a lot of that is already complete. The areas where you do have control, where you can actually present yourself in a very in a very great way to take advantage of the opportunity is via the different sections. So today, there's 8 sections of the UC application. How many of you have actually started the UC application already? Great. Those of you that haven't, you can actually get started on it now. The filing period is November 1st or November 30th. So you want to make sure that is done by the 30th of November. But there are 8 sections of the application. Again, we're going to focus today more so on the activities and awards, and then the personal insight section. So we're going to start with the activities and awards, and we're going to go over just some really quick basics of the activity and awards section, and then we'll go into a little bit of details of how you can fill that out. So the activities and awards, this is what it looks like. So those of you that have already started the UC application have probably seen this, but what this section is for, and I'm going to just read it verbatim, is that you've told us what you did inside the classroom, and now you have the opportunity to tell us about what you're most proud of outside the classroom. We're looking for quality, not quantity, which is huge. Okay, we're looking for quality, not quantity. It's not how many extracurricular activities and awards that you've been involved in, but more so the quality of those activities and awards. Which means that even though you'll have room to tell us about 20 activities and awards, make sure to focus on the ones that are most important to you. Choose experiences that demonstrate commitment, responsibility, leadership, and most of all, genuine interest. And so we'll talk a little bit about more about what that means. When you go in and add an activity and award, you're going to have different categories that you can list these different opportunities under. One of them is the award or honor, right? And so we want to know about the awards and honors you received that mean the most to you. Educational prep programs, so any programs, activities that have enriched your academic experience or helped you prepare for college. So for example, Starting Point Mentorship Program is an enrichment program or educational prep program. Puente, Umoja, Mesa, STEM, any of those programs that are prep programs can fall under that category. Extracurricular activity, right? These can include hobbies, clubs, sports, or anything else you haven't had the chance to tell us about. Volunteering and community service. So these are activities that you've donated time and effort to without getting paid. And then work experience, right? It's an opportunity for you to tell us about any paid jobs or paid internships that you've had. The important thing to note really with this is that it doesn't really matter where you put a particular activity or an award. We read every application from beginning to end, word for word, and we're not going to penalize students at all in anything in the application. Nothing on the application is viewed as negative. It's either viewed as neutral or added value. And so if you put your employment opportunity under an award or honor, we're not going to penalize you and say, oh, wow, that's a job, and you put it under the wrong section. The most important thing is for you to put the information in the application. Anything that gives us context, anything that gives us insight into who you are is more than welcome to be added on these particular sections. These do not have to be school related. Anything that you do outside of school, anything that you do in your communities, in your families, in your homes, all of that great stuff can also be included. So when it comes to these activities and awards, the first thing you want to do is you want to write out the full name, then use acronyms. And what we mean by that is a lot of you are a part of different programs and things in your campuses that oftentimes have acronyms. SPMP is one of them. There's a lot of folks that refer to Starting Point Mentorship Program as SPMP. There's EOPS. There's STEM. There's MESA. And a lot of these, while they may be common, we do have a lot of readers who may not be familiar. So you want to write out the full name, then use acronyms. So if you're going to include something that has an acronym, spell it out. So you want to write Starting Point Mentorship Program, and then you can start using SPMP. You want to write out math, engineering, science, and what's the A for Mesa? I'm already forgetting off the top of my head. right? Whatever the A is in Mesa, you want to write that out. And then you can start using the acronyms. Abbreviating is okay. Abbreviating is okay. So if you want to go ahead and abbreviate something, make sure that it makes sense. So if you're going to put, for example, the word between, and you don't want to write out the entire word, then you can put BW or B/W. And the reason why that's okay is because you do have a character count. And there's a 500 character count per section or per activity that you include. And so you want to stay within those 500 characters. And oftentimes, abbreviating a word is helpful. Make sure that it's understandable. Make sure that it's, something like BW, which is common, BC for because, those kinds of things. Don't put an acronym that we may not understand, such as IHA. Who knows what IHA stands for? If you were to read that on an essay or anywhere, IHA. You probably don't know, right? Because I made it up, right? IHA is basically means I hate abbreviating, right? You would never, ever get to figure that out without having that other context. So if you're going to use abbreviations, make sure that you're not using those type where we're not going to understand it, but something like between, because, academic, right? If you're going to use the word academic and you want to put ACAD, that's okay as well. Most of you shouldn't have a problem with this because, again, there is 500 characters, which is now more so than it has been in years past. So you may still be able to spell out the entire word. We want you to write about your role and what you did, right? Again, going back and looking at your responsibilities, your accomplishment, any leadership roles that you had in these activities. It's not so much we're looking to see what that activity is, but more so what did you do in that activity? What did you gain from that activity? What were your roles? What were your responsibilities? And then we want to know if it was selective, right? Give us quantitative measures. And we'll talk a little bit about this, but the quantitative measures give us a lot more context into, for example, how competitive an award might be. It gives us context into what kind of GPA you might have had to have. It gives us context into how many people you might have led or how many people you might have been responsible for in a club or an organization. So the quantitative measures are helpful as well. We're looking for a description, not a definition. And so when we're talking about a program, we're not looking for you to define what that program is, but more so for you to describe what that program is. We're looking for you to describe what you've done, what you've accomplished, what your responsibilities were, and any instances of leadership that you may have demonstrated in that particular activity. You'll see in the little screenshot, I know it's a little small up there, but I pulled basically the definition of the Puente program and copied and pasted it. And a lot of students oftentimes are told to do that. What happens is this doesn't really tell me about you and what you've done in the program. It tells me about the program itself. So again, the definition of what the Puente program is isn't as much important as it is what you did in that particular program. So we're not looking for you to define what programs and activities and awards that you were a part of, but more so for you to describe what it is that you did, right? Again, it's the context. So capturing your accomplishments in each of these activities. Use the best estimate of your time. So when it comes to these activities and awards, the only thing that we're really going to consider is what you've done while you've been in college. Anything that you did in high school, we're not really concerned with anymore. At the end of the day, anything that you have that's high school related is neutral information for us. It doesn't really add any value. Now, if it's something you did in high school and you continued to do while you were in college, you can absolutely include that because the key there is that you were doing it while you were still in college. So in terms of activities, we're looking for what you've done recently within the last year, 2, 3, or 4, however long you've been at your community college. We're looking for a best estimate of time commitment. It's going to ask you how many years, how many hours, how many weeks did you do this particular program. I know that oftentimes sometimes you're in a club or a program that 1 week you might have spent 20 hours on that activity. The next week you might have spent 2 hours, and it fluctuates like that, and it's hard for you to really get a grasp of like how many hours per week did I actually spend in this program. A best estimate of time is okay. We are not sticklers in the sense of going in and calculating all of the hours and the weeks and the months to really verify if it was even humanly possible, for you to spend this much time on that activity. But we do want to see a best estimate of time. The other thing is that the Office of the President does conduct some random verifications. And so if you are selected to verify the information on your application, you want to make sure that you're able to provide some kind of proof or evidence that you actually did participate in the activity. So we work on the honor system, right? We want students to present themselves with accuracy, with honesty, with integrity on their applications. And so if you didn't participate in a program, if you didn't do anything in a program, then don't include that on the application, right? Again, it's not so much the quantity of how many of activities and awards, but the quality, right? So really look at what awards, activities, extracurriculars you've been a part of that truly express your leadership, your responsibility, and your accomplishments. Consider non-traditional activities, so caring for siblings, working unpaid for a family business. Those are also all considered extracurricular. At the end of the day, the way I like to describe it is, if you had 100% of your time available to you to focus and engage solely on your academics, we would absolutely want you to get straight A's in those classes. But we understand that not every one of you has 100% of your time to dedicate to your studies, especially the transfer student population. So if you do have 100% of time to fully engage in your academics and you did get straight A's, you can tell us, what opportunities did you take advantage of? Did you take advantage of the opportunity that you had the privilege to have this time to engage in your academics? And what did you do with that time, right? Did you go and watch YouTube videos on a subject you enjoyed? Did you use the additional time that you had to go and speak to your professors, right? What opportunities did you take advantage of with the amount of time that you have? Most of us don't have 100% of time to fully engage in our academics. If we were to break down our day, you can kind of break down what your responsibilities are in any given day by a certain percent of how much time you spent doing that activity. Anything that keeps you away from your academics that is productive is absolutely valuable as an extracurricular activity. And so if you spend time on your phone, and I know this because I just learned this, but on Instagram, you can like check your activity and to see how long you've been on Instagram and how many hours or minutes you spend on it per day. Something like that, that's not productive, that you're just scrolling and just kind of, just doing the whole social media bit, maybe not something that's going to be valuable in the application. Now, if you're using social media because you're researching something that's tied to social media, absolutely. Non-traditional activities, for example, I had a student the other day, and this was actually a high school student, but the high school student was at a college fair with me, and he was with his mother. And so the student asked me some questions, I responded back, and then the mother, or the student turned to his mother and then started translating everything that I had said. And to me, I value those things, right? Because at the end of the day, if that student, right, didn't have to be there to translate for his mother, he could have been using that time to focus and engage in his academics. Some of us have that privilege, right? Some of us have the privilege to be in a household where our parents did attend college before, where our parents do understand and speak the English language, and that they're able to go to a college for example, and gather information while you as a student are studying for an exam, or while you as a student are participating in an extracurricular activity. Those are what we call non-traditional things. That student at that point that I spoke with had no idea that that was something they can include in their application. So if you do those kinds of things, if you translate for your parents at home, that is taking time away from your studies, from your academics, but is also something productive. You can absolutely include that in the extracurriculars. If you take care of your siblings, family members, anything again that you do that is productive, you can include in these extracurricular activity sections. Now, here's a couple of examples, and in terms of what those can look like. And I know it's really small, so I'll read it off for you. And the one on your left-hand side is a student that received an award called the Soaring Eagle Award. It was a school award. It was an academic award. The student got it in 12th grade, and it was given to one student. The requirements were that it was given to one student every year for academic performance. And then what you did, the student said, I went to school. Okay. Now, I do want to just give a quick disclaimer. I was updating this presentation. Clearly I forgot to update this slide. So I know that this is a 12th grade award. We're just going to pretend that this happened in community college, okay, or whatever four-year university they might be at. But in this instance, the student had a grand opportunity to explain to us what the requirements for the award were and what they did. And so there's a lot of things that are missing, right? It says given to one student every year for academic performance. Well, what does academic performance mean, right? When I was in high school, I showed up to school, I did my work. Was it great work? Probably not, but I did what I had to do. Is that considered academic performance? It says given to one student. Well, what does that mean? How many students had to actually apply for this particular award? Or was it that they put everyone's name in a fishbowl and then they actually pulled somebody's name out and said, guess what, Ricardo, you get the Soaring Eagle Award because you got picked out of this fishbowl at random, right? There's a lot of things that are missing. Student also has the opportunity to say what they did, and they said they just went to school. Well, what does that mean, right? We all, for the most part, go to school. And so how can you make this better in terms of taking advantage of the opportunity to present yourself? Use those character counts. Make sure you provide us with the context. So on the right-hand side, your right-hand side, what you see now is the requirements for the award. The student says Academic Excellence Award, and its students must have a 3.8 GPA to be eligible. Only one person selected for the award out of 450 students in their graduating class, and it comes with a $100 scholarship. Now I have a lot more context. Now I know that academic performance is defined as a 3.8 GPA and above. So this is for students that were doing really well academically. I also know that it was one student selected out of 450 students in their graduating class, right? So I know now that it was a pretty selective award that the student was honored to receive. And then I know that it comes with a $100 scholarship. The second piece, the student saying, what did they do? The student writes, I worked really hard to earn this award. I chose to attend 0 periods so that I can work with my peers to get my assignments done. I also attended after-school tutoring. And for subjects I wasn't too confident in, I used the Khan Academy for additional practice and watched a lot of YouTube videos on the subject matter. I had to do all of this at school because I don't have access to a computer or internet at home. Tons of more context. Now I know what the student actually did. I know that they had to take time out of their 0 period in order to go and get support. I know that they stayed after school. I know that they're working on a computer and doing additional subjects and work. I know that they don't have access to a computer or internet at home, so they have to do that work during the times that they're available at their school. Tons and tons more context, right? This isn't an actual student, by the way. I made all of this stuff up, okay? Make sure that that context, what you've done, the accomplishments, anything that's taking time out of your schedule to, again, engage 100% in your academics is in these activities and awards. And you now have the luxury of including a lot more information because you have more character counts than in previous years, right? And I shouldn't really be saying that because the one that's going to really get affected is me, because when I read the applications, now I have to read more words, right? But use those character counts, right? The more context you can give, the better for us to truly understand and review your application. There are additional comment sections as well. There's 2 of them. There's one in the academic history and one in the personal insight questions. This is a 550 word limit, and it is optional. A lot of students choose to not write anything here, and that's perfectly fine. And a lot of students get admitted without writing anything here as well. But a lot of students also choose to include any additional information. And so, for example, students can explain bad grades, grade changes, or repeating a course. We get a lot of students that have W's and withdrawals that think that W stands for worst ever, and it really doesn't, right? Withdrawals for us are neutral, meaning that they don't really mean anything. It's just kind of neutral, doesn't add value, doesn't take away from the application. But oftentimes students feel the need to explain that, and that's perfectly fine. We get a lot of students that highlight grade trends. Many of our students, especially in the transfer population, maybe started at a community college, didn't do so well, took 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years off, started a family, got a job, was in a better place, and decided now I'm ready to go back to school, and started getting straight A's, right? So if a student wants to explain why their grades may not have been solid during their first part of their career, but and then got better, this is a great place for that. Gaps in education. It's going to ask you if you have any gaps in education. It's going to ask you what you've been doing. Simple, I was working, I was at home taking care of family. That's perfectly fine. And then any additional context that we might not otherwise see in the rest of the application can be included here. Okay, so again, remember the key is that information is either neutral or added value. So if you're thinking about, should I include this in additional comments? I'm not quite sure if I should or if I shouldn't. I always tell students to go ahead and include it, and then let us as readers determine whether that information is going to be neutral or if that information is going to be added value. Okay, but you do have that opportunity to add additional context. The additional comments are not an extension of your personal insight question responses, and so we'll get into what that looks like in a second. But this isn't an opportunity for you to continue a response. This is an opportunity for you to give additional context. Yeah. I just want to make sure I got the question right. So you went to high school in another country, and then you came here and took the same courses here, or your senior year of high school here? Yeah, it's going to ask you, but that's not going to be so much an additional comment. There's actually a section for them on the UC application that asks you where you went to high school. So if it's already on the application, you don't have to include it again here. If you want to, students do, right? Students oftentimes will include and say that, the application asked me what years I went and attended high school. And then here you may want to explain, right? Like if you feel comfortable and you feel that's something you want to express about what that transition might have been like, or just kind of the process of, I did my senior year here. Previously, I was in another country at another high school. You can absolutely put that as well. But there is a section for your academic history where you would actually include what high schools you attended as well. So you finished your quarter already? Yeah, that's fine. You can put that in additional comments. So that's a great question. So the question is, for those of you that are going to be listening online later, the question is that I'm going to finish all of my requirements by the end of this quarter, and then I'm planning on taking on an internship afterward. Is that a gap? Absolutely, right? That's going to be something you can include, and I think that's valuable as well. So for you to explain to us what that internship is and what you're doing, I think that's great information. But yeah, you can include that in the additional comments and say the reason why I am not taking courses afterward, and it's going to ask you anyway, right? When you have gaps, it's going to ask you what are those gaps, so you can include them there or even in the additional comments. So 1, 2, and then 3. So I have two questions. So first question is like on the activity section, you know how you said you can mention this program? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So in the description, like should you mention like about Berkeley, like it helps students transfer to like Berkeley, or just mention this UC, not Berkeley? What does the program do? Either or, like that's not going to be something that's going to like make or break. Like the fact that we see the word Berkeley or that you're part of a Berkeley program isn't going to add tremendous value. And then maybe on the opposite end, right, another UC might see it and see Berkeley. So it's totally up to you, right? But if your program was designed for you to learn how to get into Berkeley, then be honest, right? Like I'm in a program that's teaching me how to get into Berkeley. If it was designed to talk about UCs, I'm in a program to get me into UC. Like that's perfectly fine. Like we're not gonna hold any bad judgment against you, because even if you were doing a program, for example, from UCLA, we're not gonna look at that and say, oh, this student was like at the end of the day, there's a lot of students that apply from Southern California that are doing programs that are affiliated with UCLA that apply here, and that's perfectly fine. So I would say just be honest with whatever it is that you're accomplishing in those particular programs. So I'm covering that in one of my essays. Should I mention that in conventional comment? Great question. So when the question is that if I'm already covering one of my gaps in education in my personal insight question response, should I include an additional comment? And the answer to that is it depends, right? And the reason I say it depends is that you don't want to duplicate any information. And so if you're already covering that and what you're going to include in additional comments is the same as what's in your responses, then I would say you probably don't have to include it. Now, if it's something different that is not an addition or a continuation of your response, but still adds value in terms of what you did in that gap year, you can absolutely put that in there as well. Whoever was next. So the question is, the opposite grade trend, right? Is if I did really well and then my grades went lower, how would I answer that? And the reality is that I will never tell you how to respond to something, right? Because the reason is because only you know why that might have happened. And so if you feel that there's some kind of context that you can provide us that might inform why your grades might have dropped, absolutely include that, because that is something we are going to see and something that we're going to notice, like, hey, the student did really well, but their grades dropped. And if we don't have any of that additional context as to why that might have happened, then we can't really, we don't make any assumptions and say, oh, maybe something bad happened or maybe they were going through something. We just kind of take it at face value. But if there was something that happened that really affected you academically, then you can absolutely put that. And that's why it's hard for me to really sit up here and say, this is a great way to respond to it, because only you know what that circumstance is. And so what I can say is that this is the foundation and what are things that you can talk about, but you ultimately have the control of how you want to present that. But that is a great use of the additional comments to explain why your grades might have dropped. We see that all the time too, where students do really well and then there's just a semester within their educational career that they didn't do well, and it's because of, I had to work more hours, I was helping my family, whatever the reasons are. And that's great contextual information for us, again, to see the entire picture of who you are, right? Because you all learned in the last session that we use comprehensive review. So we're looking at everything about you. And at the end of the day, we're really trying to paint this big picture and this big story of who you are and what that all means, right? So that context into why your grades might have dropped allows us to see the picture a lot more clear in respects to what might have happened during that time. The educational steps in the summer. You know what? I'm not sure. I know in the application they're gonna ask you, and if you were just like working, like that's perfectly fine. The key is, I'm gonna be honest with you. The key with gaps is we just want to make sure that students weren't attending other universities. Okay, and oftentimes that happens. And when we're on that note, I don't know if Marcia emphasized this last session, but you want to be true and accurate with your academic history. Okay, make sure you report every single college course, every single college you attended, whether that's here in the U.S. or whether that's in another country. Any grade that you receive, whether it's a failing grade, a D grade, a C grade, a W grade, anything that you have transcripts for, you want to include in the application. Okay, because it does happen that later on we find out, right, that a student has coursework from another institution that they didn't report, and that can affect you super negatively, right? At the end of the day, we're not trying to build students down. We're not trying to look at students and say, how can we build you down? We're trying to build you up. So if you have those grades and you have those transcripts, use the additional comments to explain to us what might have happened during that time that informs what grades you might have received during that time. But yeah, the educational gaps, if it does ask you for summer, again, just be honest. This is what I was doing in the summer, and that's perfectly fine. We'll go here, then over there. Again, it doesn't matter, right? Like if you put it in the awards or honors, we're not going to sit there and say, oh, you put it in the wrong section, so we're not going to give you credit for it, right? What's important is that you give us that context. And so if you said you show art galleries. Yeah, I show my artwork in galleries. You show your artwork in galleries, yeah. Right? So in order for you to do that, you have to create artwork, right? Unless someone's creating it for you, right? Which I don't think is the case. But if you're creating that artwork, right, that's additional time that's considered a hobby and an extracurricular activity that you can put in there, right? And it could be two separate things, right? One is you painting, right, and being artistic, and then the other, like, what is that process like? Like, what does that mean when you say, I show my artwork in galleries? Does it mean I just say, here's my artwork and you go post it up? Or does that mean that you have to coordinate things? Does that mean that you have to meet with, an exhibitor? Does that mean that you have to prep your artwork? Does that mean that you have to go and present your artwork and display it in a way that you want to present it, right? The context is what's really important there. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. You're going to include every single course that you completed. Whether, again, D's and F's, they're not bad. Okay. I know y'all are trying to apply to Berkeley. and y'all think that we require a 4.0 GPA to get in. That is not the case, right? Which is why we use comprehensive review. We have many students that get admitted that have D's and F's in their records, that have withdrawals in their records, and that's not something that again we're gonna look at and say you're not Berkeley material because you may have gotten a D or an F in a course. Back there in the back. Mm-hmm. Who remembers what I said earlier? And I'm not trying to put you on blast, right? Mention it, and then let us determine whether that's added value or not. The fact that you're even having to think about whether to include that or not should be a sign for you to include that, and then let us determine whether it's neutral or added value. I do want to say that it does ask you anyway what kind of a degree you're going to receive in the educational section of it. But if you wanted to include something in the extracurriculars or even in the awards and say I was awarded this associate degree for transfer, that's perfectly fine, right? Because at the end of the day, if we read that and we already know it from somewhere else in the other part of the application, it's just going to be neutral information, right? But it might be something that maybe we don't see that could have added value. So when in doubt with putting things on the application, if you have the space to include it on the application, right? And then let us determine again whether it's neutral or added value.
Is there a specific way to best format the additional comment section, with bullet points worse than
Great question. So the format for the additional comments is totally up to you. It can be very informal, so it can be bullet points, numbers, lettering system. It can be single sentences, such as, I was awarded an associate degree for transfer. I'm also trying to get another associate's, and I have to take one more class. Super simple, straight to the point, perfectly fine. If you want to, kind of write it in an essay form, that's fine too. It's really informal.
And does that apply to what other parts of the application does that apply to?
Pretty much everything with the exception of the PIQs. Hope that's, well, we'll see. Yeah. If you took classes, yes. If you have a transcript that has and you have an academic record from that school, you want to report that on the application. So what do you mean you were just enrolled but you didn't take classes? Like you applied but never took any classes? So you don't have a transcript? So you don't need to include that. Okay? All right. So moving on to the personal insight questions, which is another part of the application, again, where you can present yourself and really strengthen your application. Just in terms of the basics, right, you probably have already seen them, but you do have 8 questions to choose from. You must respond to the first question, and then you choose 3 of the remaining 7. Each response is limited to a maximum 350 words, which we'll talk about how to approach that in a few slides. And then which questions you choose to answer is entirely up to you, right? There's no question that is better than the other. There's no question that we have a preference for over any other. The best question to answer is the best question that is going to be most relevant to your experience, the question that's going to provide us with the most context and the most insight into who you are. Okay, so the questions themselves, you have the option to choose. And so the questions are there. And again, I know that this is pretty small. We're not going to really go through all of the questions because most of you have already kind of started them and seen them. The only one I will talk about is that first one. And the reason why I like to talk about the first one is because it's a question that oftentimes confuses students a little bit because it states, please describe how you have prepared for your intended major, including your readiness to succeed in your upper division courses once you enroll at the university. And so oftentimes students take this in a very literal sense, which I don't blame them. But they'll say things like, I went orientation, I did my assessment. I met with a counselor. We created an ed plan. I completed my EGETSI. I completed my associates. And now I'm transferring and I'm ready to go to upper division. I see a lot of you smiling, right? Like, it sounds funny, but we do see that a lot, right? And again, understandably so, because it is asking you how have you prepared for your major. And most of you, how have you prepared? You took the appropriate classes, right? You went and saw the appropriate staff and faculty in your college to make sure that you met all of the check marks and all of the requirements, which is again perfectly fine. But the really important thing about this question and what the question is really asking is more so about your interest and investment in the major, right? What is your interest? What is your investment in the major? Show us with a recent example or a recent experience how you've demonstrated interest in that major. Okay, so the question is really asking about your major. Please, please, and I will reiterate this forever and ever, apply to the major that you want to get into. All of this loophole stuff, all of this stuff that you probably heard about, apply to this other major because it's easier and then you can declare another major. I hate that with a passion. I get it. It's a loophole. I get it. It's an opportunity, but it doesn't guarantee you admission. It doesn't guarantee that because you select an easier major or a major that doesn't have any major prerequisites that you're going to be admitted. It doesn't declare that you're going to be able to declare the major that you want. And at the end of the day, you're cheating yourself and you're cheating the system. Be true to yourself. Be honest to yourself. If you want a Berkeley education, strive for the degree that you want to apply for. I hear this all the time. Oh, I really want to study econ, but I'm going to go and apply for Near Eastern Asian Studies. And then once I get admitted, I'll change my major. And I hear it all the time via questions. Can I change my majors? And the reality is that yes, you can. Right? College of Letters in Science admits to the college, and then you declare your major after your first semester. And so the reality is that you can, but it's not a guarantee that you can declare your major. So when speaking about your major in this question, make sure you're talking about the major that you want to pursue, the major you're most passionate about. We'll talk a little bit about more what that means. Why are the PIQs important? Well, one, you can't submit the application without them, right? So you need to put something in the PIQ responses, even if it's just one word. It's an opportunity for self-advocacy. It's an opportunity for you to advocate for yourself. It's the one place in the application where you have full control to really toot your own horn, right? This is the place where you want to brag. This is a place for you to not remain humble. Here, you want to brag. You want to really boast about your accomplishments and really, put your leadership and your responsibilities out there. And it's, again, an opportunity for you to advocate for yourself, right? A lot of us, including myself, right, including the work that I do here, I know that I'm great at what I do, right? A lot of us know that we're good in certain aspects, but we have what is called this imposter syndrome. And sometimes we don't see it as valuable. And sometimes we, don't brag and don't boast, normally, and we remain very humble. This is not the place to do that. This is the place you really want to brag and boast about yourself. The PIQ sets students apart, and then it does provide context to the rest of the application, right? The PIQs inform everything else we see in the application in respect to your grades, your coursework, and your educational journey. Without these PIQs, without your voice, all we see is coursework, grades, and numbers, which we know you are a lot more than just a grade and a GPA. This is kind of the different factors that we look at. There's 14 factors. Oh, got you. It's okay. You don't need to take pictures of this because there's nothing that you can do that's going to say, if I meet all of these check boxes, I'm going to be admitted. I'll let you take a photo. Go ahead. But this is what we look at, right? Your GPA, your major prep coursework, participation in programs, everything that we're talking about is included here, but just in a more, kind of a more policy-driven way. But again, if you go and look at this list and you say, I meet every one of these checks, that still does not mean you're guaranteed admission to any UC. Okay? And then there's no single factor that guarantees admission to UC Berkeley. The information for PIQs, right? An essay versus the personal insight questions. It's not an essay, right? The PIQ responses are not an essay. This is a response. This is your opportunity to speak to us as if we were talking in person. Since we don't conduct interviews, this is your opportunity to really have a conversation with us in your own authentic voice, in the way that you speak, in the way that you want to share your story. So it's not an essay, right? And what I mean by that is we're not looking for intros. We're not looking. Hold on, give me a second. Hello? I'm in the middle of a presentation, Mom. You hear all the students laughing at you because I had answered my phone? I got to call you back. I'm done at like in 30, 40 minutes. You call me 3 times. I got to make sure everything's okay. So anyway, we're not looking for intro sentences. We're not looking for a thesis. We're not looking for analogies. We're not looking for metaphors. We're not grading you on your writing style and whether or not you're a great writer. We're not proofreading these. We're not looking at grammar. We're not looking at punctuation. I'm not concerned with, sitting on the dock of the bay and, looking at the ocean, glistening like a million diamonds and perusing all of my opportunities and my dreams. And all of that romanticizing stuff is not a fit for this. You have 350 words. You want to get straight and to the point. So how many of you in here have had a job before, right? When you have a job, right, you go into an interview, they have your resume and they have your application. That's what we get. Your application is your resume. Then you go in the interview and they ask you questions to see how well of a fit you're going to be for that particular job. So when they ask you, hey, why do you think you're a great fit for the manager position at this restaurant? You don't go in there and say, well, when I was 4 years old, we used to have dinner every Friday at my house, and I would make like fake money and a fake menu, and I would charge my family, for the meals, and it was almost like I owned a restaurant. And then when I was 10, right, you don't talk about from the beginning of when you got interested in becoming a restaurant manager. You talk about what you've done recently. You don't express analogies. You don't use metaphors. You talk direct and to the point. That's what we're looking for. You have 350 words. Use those 350 words wisely. Responses are not graded. We talked about it. Sob stories don't guarantee admission. We're not concerned with the story. It's 10% story, 90% impact. Okay, and what we mean by that is what's most important is the impact. I'm not so much concerned that you had a battle with cancer and what that actually was and what kind of cancer you had and how many days you spent in the hospital and how many times you had to go to chemo. That stuff, I hear you and I know that's a part of your story. I want to know what the impact of that was. What was the result of that? How did that make you a different person? How did it make you a better person? How did it make you a worse person? Right? How did it make you more resourceful? What was the impact? I'm not so concerned with you describing what kind of neighborhood you live in and the gangs and the violence and the drugs that happen in your neighborhood. 90% of your response should be the impact of you living in that neighborhood. What is it that you have to do in order for you to survive in that neighborhood? What are resources that you use? What are strategies? That's what's important. The impact is more so important than the actual story. So a sob story doesn't guarantee you any admission. It doesn't guarantee that it's a strong response. I and my statements are encouraged, so please use I and my statements. In an English essay, we typically are told not to use I and my statements. Here you can. The more you use I and my, the more it tells me as a reader that you're talking about yourself. And then do keep in mind that one response is read by all UC campuses to which the student applies. So you do want to remain neutral, okay? Don't talk about how great Berkeley is and, that you met with a professor and that you already started doing research and that you already got your foot in the door so you know you're a Berkeley student. We know how great Berkeley is. The other UCs know how great Berkeley is. We know what kind of faculty we have here. We know what kind of research opportunities we have here. You trying to tell me how knowledgeable you are about Berkeley isn't going to get me excited to admit you to the campus, okay? If you did a program here on Berkeley, again, the impact, right? What is it that you accomplished? What is it that you did? Not so much who is it that you worked with. Be specific in your responses, right? Give us the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We're going to talk about this in a second. Choose quality over quantity. This is huge. This is a huge one because we get a lot of students that feel like I need to include every single thing that I've done in order for you to really be like, wow, this student did 20 leadership things. They're a Berkeley student. But what happens when students end up choosing quantity over quality is um, they say things like, I was the student body president of my campus and I was able to get gender neutral bathrooms on our campus. Furthermore, I was a captain of the robotics team and we went to the state competition and we won the state championship. Moreover, right, when you start doing that, you end up just giving us a list of things without any substance and context. And so we're going to talk about how to approach that. Start early, get feedback, and revise. You all are going to give feedback, right? You all are getting the opportunity to sit with an admissions counselor to give you some feedback. My word of advice to you is, after this presentation, you shouldn't really have to rewrite your entire responses after you meet with a counselor, right? If you were following this formula, for the most part, there's not going to be much feedback. At the end of the day, it would be a victory for me if y'all showed up to these sessions and we basically said, these look great, there's not much that you have to do anymore. The likelihood of that happening, right, there's always room for improvement. We just don't want to get to a point where we say, yeah, you might want to rewrite the entire thing, okay? We're giving you the formula, so you're already starting early. You're going to get feedback and revision. Focus on more recent experiences, another huge one. Recent for every single question, not just the interest in your major, every question. If you're doing something in your community, if you're talking about an educational barrier, recent while you were in college. I am not concerned with what happened to you in high school. I'm not concerned with what happened to you in middle school. What happened to you in middle school and high school, if it doesn't have a direct effect on you today and what you did at your college, then that's probably something we don't need to know about. We are looking for things that you have done or experienced while you've been in college that directly affected your academics. So make sure you're talking about recent experience. If you're going to talk about a talent, I don't want to know that when you were in 6th grade, you went to the talent show and won because you did a breakdance routine. That's great. Maybe I want to, see the routine, but beyond that, right, it doesn't tell me what you've done now, right? Now, if you're still currently, right, utilizing that talent and you started a breakdancing club on your campus, absolutely we want to know that, right? If you organize a dance event or a talent show on your local school, absolutely we want to know that. The important thing, again, is making sure that these experiences are recent within the time frame that you've been in college. And then again, choose questions that will give us the most context. Right as if you're speaking to a stranger and treat it like an interview. We talked about that a little bit already. Show us your journey and use your authentic voice. Okay, and what I mean by that is speak in the way you speak. If you don't use big words and you don't use, everyday terminology that's maybe, quote unquote articulate, that's fine, right? Use your authentic voice. Make sure that you're speaking to us as if we were having a conversation. I don't want to read something and have it sound like a thesaurus, right? And you went in every other word, like, oh, let me go and put in this fancy word, right? No, speak as if you were speaking to us, right? Slang, right? It's okay. If you use slang, make sure it's something that we're going to understand, right? Because you never know who's going to read it, right? But be true to yourselves. At the end of the day, what I tell students is many of you have probably either seen a performance, meaning somebody either singing or acting or doing some kind of drama. Many of you have read a book before. Many of you have read a poem, and you feel that person, right? You feel that poem, you feel that reading, you feel that music, you just feel it. And there's other times where you don't. It's the same thing with the responses. When we're reading these responses, there's some times where we just feel it. You feel that person's authenticity, you feel that person's vibe, and then other times you just really don't get that feeling. That's what we're looking for. Use your authentic voice. Share your story the way you want it to be told, not the way you think I want to read it, right? At the end of the day, when you apply to these schools, you should be able to say, I applied to these schools, and if I get admitted, great. And if I don't, I at least told them the story in the way that I wanted to share my story, okay? Don't use cliches, quotes, or jokes. Remember to use your own words. Cliches and jokes oftentimes can be offensive. Oftentimes they don't make sense. And oftentimes they don't provide us any context into who you are. Quotes are the same thing. Quotes are words from another individual that is not you. Okay? Don't write about a particular UC campus, right? We talked about that already. We already know what the campuses offer. Don't write about distant events in the past, and then don't be ashamed to brag. All of this stuff we've already talked about and touched upon. Don't write about everyone but yourself. That's another huge one. A lot of times students want to talk about someone that influenced them, whether it's a parent, whether it's an instructor, whether it's an employee, And oftentimes those are some really great responses in the sense that I really want to meet that individual, but unfortunately we're not admitting that individual. We're admitting you. So if you are going to talk about, for example, your parents' journey and how that influenced you to now have the opportunity to even take advantage of a college degree, that's okay, but tell me why it's important to you, right? Don't describe your parents' journey and how painful it was for them to get to where you're at today and all of their struggles, right? Because again, we're not admitting your parents, we're admitting you. So make sure that you write about yourself. All the time you want to be writing about yourself. Don't duplicate information that can be found in other parts of the application. Don't assume that we know anything about you. And then don't treat this like an essay for an English class. Okay? Quick pop quiz. Okay, true or false? Is it bad to mention race, ethnicity, sexuality, citizenship, religion, political views, etc. in my PIQs? Absolutely not. You can mention whatever you feel comfortable mentioning in these responses. We do not judge anyone on these responses. We do not share these responses. They're confidential, and we also have extensive training for us to check our biases. And what I mean by that is, yeah, there might be somebody that writes something in the responses that I particularly may not agree with, and that's okay because we have an opportunity in that application to say can't read, and it goes to somebody who will give it a fair review, right? Because I may not judge that student fairly because I may not agree with their beliefs, for example. So you can write about anything. We hear it all. We hear everything from students coming out for the very first time in their responses, sexual abuse, domestic violence, incarceration, deportation. We read everything that you can potentially think of. We've probably read it already. So feel free to share as much as you feel comfortable sharing, knowing that it's not going to penalize you and it's not going to hurt you, right? If you're a avid Republican, Trump supporter, and you're all about 45, that's fine, right? I might hit can't read on that application and give it a fair review to somebody else, but that's fine. You are absolutely okay to put whatever you want. There are things I should not say in my PIQs that may be held negatively against me. Again, nothing is held negatively against you. Information is either neutral or added value. My responses will be shared with the public. We do not share any responses. You see that I didn't bring any responses today. You've seen that the ones we looked at in the extracurriculars, I told you that I actually made up. And the reason one is for confidentiality, but two, I don't want y'all to look at that response and say, oh, that student got in, so let me follow that formula and just kind of put in my own experiences and substitute it for what they put, because that's not how it works, right? Again, your authentic voice, your passion, your genuineness. There's a perfect combination of PIQs that will increase my chances of admission. Again, false, right? There is no combination of what questions you choose, and then that there's a perfect PIQ response. The perfect PIQ response is the one that you feel most comfortable saying, I've told my story. There is no perfect PIQ. There's nothing that I can say that will tell you this PIQ is perfect because only you know your story. The only story that I can tell you with perfection is my own. And that's the same thing with you all. So there's never going to be a perfect PIQ. So don't strive for the perfect PIQ. Strive for the most effective one that provides the most context. Yeah.
How do you avoid something, or can you include it in your application that takes place like after November 30th, but before like the April 2nd?
So that kind of stuff, that's a great question. Like, how do you include stuff that you might be a part of that's after the application? The reality is that that's neutral for us because we don't really know if you're going to take advantage of that, and it's not like we're going to hold it, to you. The only thing we are going to hold you to is what courses and grades you include in the January update. But anything like that, I would say it's okay to include it, but it'd probably be more neutral information anyway because it's something that you haven't actually done. But yeah, feel free to include it if that's something you feel you want to include.
Does the January update, does that have
No.
comments?
No, the January update, you will not be able to update extracurriculars. And on that note, please don't email us saying, hey, I got this really cool work and I included on my application. Once the applications are closed, they're closed. There's nothing that y'all can update on the application with the exception of the update in January where you're going to update just your coursework and your grades. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is for the first question about interest in the major, the recent experience is like something we've done in the community college, and that's absolutely true, right? Because again, the idea behind your interest in the major is that your interest might have stemmed from a very early age, but if you're applying to that major, you must have some kind of interest still in that major. And so it could be that you might have read a chapter in a book that solidifies your interest. You could have been a participant in a club or an organization, some competition you might have been a part of. It might have been an instructor you might have, had a great connection with. It might have been a research opportunity you took advantage of. Anything really that solidifies your interest and demonstrates to us that you're invested in that major, right? That's what's most important. So yeah, you want it to be recent because, again, if you're telling us that you want to major in business because you helped out at your parents' grocery store when you were 14 years old, okay, great, right? Who knows? Maybe your parents sold the store now. You have no interest whatsoever in working in a grocery store. We don't know that, right? So, want to know what's recent. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like if you want to, you can even use a couple sentences, right? Like if you want to introduce where your passion stemmed from, absolutely you can include that. The idea is to not expand so much on that, right? Like if you wanted to introduce it, it'd be like, yeah, this is kind of where it stemmed from. And then the bulk of it should be what you've done recently that shows your investment in that major. But yeah, you can absolutely include, like a quick 1, 2, 3 sentences as to how your interests developed, whether that was early on or whenever in your life. So I saw one here too, and then we'll go three.
So in terms of applying to Haas, who looks at what? Because I remember
Haas reads their applications.
okay.
Yeah.
Like, do you want me to look at that?
The only applications that we read here are the calls to letters in science. But Haas, their own faculty, they read their applications. But it's all the same information.
Yeah.
What can you talk about the part of the application that has letters of recommendation?
There are no letters of recommendation on the application. Nope.
So was it time between after your high school graduation and before you started
That counts as recent, but it's not what you've done in the community college. So I would just caution that if you do talk about something, that's something that happened between the time you finished high school and the time you started college, that it continued on during your college. If it was just a summer program that you did that you never went back and looked at, maybe not something that's going to be as effective, but something that continued on. And it doesn't have to be the entire time, right? Like it doesn't have to be, if you were at community college for 3 years, you didn't have to do this experience for the entire 3 years. Just some kind of experience within those 3 years. Okay? So, yeah.
I'm applying to UC generally
Uh huh.
but your recommendation of science is only some neurobiology
Yeah. Because we see what major you apply to on the application.
It's just that I'm not sure. I don't think for the UC application you can specify concentration.
Correct. Yeah, we'll see it because we know all the different concentrations under MCB. Great question. All right, the writing process. I want to make sure we're already over time. If y'all got to go, that's fine. So I'm not going to feel bad. But we got maybe like about 10 more minutes. So the writing process, really quickly, when writing your PIQs, it takes me back to when I was in graduate school. And in grad school, my first class, the syllabus that we had told us that we had to write a 50-page thesis, and we had to use MLA format, what's the APA? That APA MLA is what I was used to doing, but APA, which I'd never done, which is like super strict, and yeah, it's crazy. But I was overwhelmed, and so I went to talk to my advisor, and I was like, you know what? I don't even know where to start. I don't even see myself ever writing 50 pages to complete this assignment. And he asked me a very, very great question that I use all the time, and kind of the basis of putting this writing process together here is he asked me, how do you eat an elephant? Right? And I looked at him like, what the hell are you talking about? And he asked me again, right? And I didn't know what the response was. And, he told me you one bite at a time. And he goes, what's happening is you're seeing this 50 pages as one huge elephant that you're trying to tackle in one bite. He goes, but the reality is that within those 50 pages, you have chapters. Within those chapters, you have subheadings. And within those subheadings, you have actual material that you need to write. He goes, if you break it down like that into small pieces and tackle it one bite at a time, then by the time you know it, you're going to have this complete 50 pages done without even realizing it. And that's what happens with these responses. Oftentimes, students get overwhelmed at the fact that, wow, it's 4. I have to choose. Not only are you not just giving me the 4, I have to choose the 4. So there's already anxiety over that, like which ones are the ones I got to choose. And then it's 350 words, and so it's not like it's unlimited amount of words. If that was the case, y'all would be giving us like encyclopedia novels, right, of how great you are for the university. We just wouldn't have time to read all of that. But there does sometimes become get this feeling of being overwhelmed. And so the writing process, what you want to do is essentially these PIQs are all broken up in a few words. At the end of the day, it's a big question that's centered around a particular theme. So interest in your major, leadership, creativity, talent, skill, educational opportunity or barrier, challenge, helping your community, and then something else you would like us to know. So we've now broken it down into one word. What you're going to do is you're going to select one of these words, whichever one you feel is most resonates with you and your experiences, and then you're going to write that word down. So in this case, I've chose to use the word leadership. And so with leadership, we all know that y'all are going to have multiple leadership experiences. Some of you are going to have 20, some of you are going to have 10, some of you are going to have none. Those of you that have none, maybe this question isn't the best one for you to answer. There's not going to be much for you to talk about. But most of you are going to have something to talk about and multiple instances for the questions you're answering. So I've listed them down here. President of the student body, president of the honor society, captain of the robotics competition, caretaker for siblings and grandparents, and a manager at a local restaurant. What you want to do is you want to write your list of leadership experiences that have happened within the time you've been in college. Think critically about those. Which one is most important to me, and which one do I most want to talk about in my response? Versus saying, I need them to know that I did all 5 of these things, so I'm going to list them all on my response. Choose one. With every response, it becomes way more easier to give us the context when you talk about one experience versus multiple experiences that speak to the question. So in this case, we're talking about leadership. I'm going to choose one. The other 4 that I don't choose can go where in the application? Activities, additional comments, anywhere at the end of the day, right? But you can put the other 4 in activities, in awards, additional comments, so that way we know all of the different things that you've accomplished. But for the responses, you want to select one, okay? Once you've selected that one, in my case, I selected caretaker, right? Consider non-traditional activities as well. Then you start breaking it down. Describe what you did as a caretaker. What did you do? When did you do this? Did you have to go early in the morning? Did you have to go after school? Were you unable to go to tutoring because you had to go be a caretaker? Did you have to wake up at 4 in the morning to go and take care of your family or your siblings and get them ready for school that got you and made you exhausted throughout the day? Where did you do this caretaker work? Was it close by? Was it within your own home? Did you have to travel? Did you have to take public transportation? Right? Why? Why did you choose to be a caretaker? Why is this important to you? Why is it that this is something you want to talk about? And how do you actually perform your duties as a caretaker? Once you have all of this down, this is the brainstorm part. Once you have all of the details of who, what, when, where, why, and how of this one single instance or experience, then you're going to write freely, right? Don't limit yourself to writing your thoughts within 350 words. Write 3,000 if you have to. Write 50 pages if you have to. It's easier to narrow down 30,000 words into 350 than for you to try and limit yourself to 350 by writing within the confines of that word count. So write freely. And then once you go in and read it again, all of the details that don't provide context, all of the things that you included that really don't tell us much about who you are, you can take out. Then you might end up having 700 words. You're like, I still need to get it down to 350, but all of this is important. Now is when you have to think critically. What is the most important to you, right? And it's the same concept as a job. Most interviews they happen within an hour's worth of time. You don't have the entire day to talk about every single thing that you've done. You on the spot have to think about what is most important that I want to express to this employer. It's the same concept here, right? You might have 700, words worth of material that are valuable, that are important, that you need to break down. That's when you have to start selecting what's most important. But it's a lot easier to break down to 350 than to stay within the 350. And then revise, share for feedback and polish, right? This is going to allow you to approach those questions individually without thinking about them all as one big, 8 questions I got to choose 4. Now you've broken it down to one single question, to one single word, and you provided all of the details that correspond to that particular experience that you can include in these different responses. Lastly, this is a self-care quote. One of our student run programs here, Raices Transfer Program, they did a similar program like Starting Point with some of their students, and we did a very similar workshop, and they actually created a worksheet for their students to take home. And this was on their worksheet, and when I saw it, I thought it was absolutely valuable, and we've now kind of adopted it and put it in our applications, in our presentations as well. And it says, right, that we acknowledge that PIQs can be very emotionally draining and traumatizing for some of you. So we encourage you to take a break when necessary. Drink water and nourish your body. Surround yourself with positivity. Don't compare your writing to others because your journey is unique. Be true to yourself. Follow your instincts. Trust the process. Be kind to yourself. Rest, recharge. Remind yourself that you are enough and recognize your hard work and accomplishments. And I think it's one of the most beautiful things of this presentation is because the reality is that when you're writing these responses, oftentimes you do open up wounds that might have been closed for a very long time, right? It's draining just in the fact of having to process this and write it. That in itself is draining, even if you're not writing about a traumatic experience. Take your time, take breaks. Understand that this is one part of the application. This is not the most important part of the application. It is one part of the application that informs the rest of your application. Take your time, take breaks. Understand that what you put out in these responses is going to be effective because you wrote it in the way you want to write it. And that's what's most important. And you not being admitted to a campus like Berkeley, like UCLA, or some of the more selective campuses has nothing to do or say with who you are and what you're capable of. And so when you're writing these responses, think about that, right? Think about being genuine and authentic and saying, this is my story and I'm sharing it in the way I want to share it. So a couple resources. There's a couple of PIQ pages. One of them is just the UC PIQ webpage. The other one is one that we have on our Berkeley website. It's just got like a couple of worksheets and stuff that you can probably take a look at. And that ends the presentation. Do we have any questions? I'm sure we got some questions. I'll be more than happy to take any questions at this time. So we'll go 1, 2 there. Do you do anything that's philosophy related? But you have an interest in philosophy, right? So what is your interest in? What are you doing to continue that interest? Like are you reading books about philosophy? Are you watching YouTube videos about philosophy? Yeah, absolutely. Like you can write about that, right? Like maybe something that you might have read like on your own that informs like your interest in the major. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Anything that shows, right? And that's why extracurriculars are important too, because oftentimes extracurriculars for majors like that don't have a lot of course articulation, for majors like that, it's really hard, right, to express what you've done. A lot of that stems from your own personal kind of hobbies and stuff like that with like philosophy, because there's not a lot of philosophy clubs, right? There's not a lot of like philosophy-based activities that are on campus. So a lot of it is what you do on your own. So you just got to figure out a way to express that, right? Like me, right? Like I'm super involved and heavy. I collect records, right? And there's no record clubs. There's nothing like that. But I can tell you, like if you ask me about me collecting records, I will go off on everything I enjoy about collecting records, what I do outside of work to collect records, all the work that I put into to dig for different records, what kind of records I like to dig for, right? Like you can already see that that's what we're looking for. So if you have an interest in philosophy, yeah, you may not have classes, you may not have extracurriculars, but there's something that you got to be doing, right? That's keeping your interest involved in philosophy. That's what we want to know. Or actually, it was 2 over here and then 3 back there. I'm sorry. So the change in major would probably be something for the additional time. If your major now is statistics, in the response, it'd be more helpful for you to include everything that you're doing that demonstrates your interest in statistics. And then in the additional comments, you can just simply say, I came in, intended architecture, took some stats classes, and now that's why I switched my major. That's perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. Back there. Yeah, you. Mm-hmm.
So 2 questions. So first, like my high school records are from a very long time ago. I don't even know if they exist anymore. So like the only real record of them that exists is kind of what I'm created with that at the top. So they put those in to the system, or just like leave that blank.
So you're talking about like your high school coursework or activities and stuff?
Yeah, like the grades I got for my GCSEs.
Yeah. Years ago, yeah, just do it to your best interest, because at the end of the day, we're not really using your high school coursework anyway. Like, unless you were using something from high school in terms of satisfying a particular requirement, then maybe, yeah, at that point. But if you're not using it, just to your best knowledge, include whatever information you have.
And the second one, so my son was born during my time in 2020.
Uh-huh.
So like, that's been mostly what I've been doing. So
That's
so,
absolutely great. Yeah, like, and I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something I forgot to mention when we talk about employment, right? Employment, jobs, that is the number one extracurricular activity for students. So if you're working 20, 30, 40 hours a week, we're not going to expect you to still get involved in stuff outside of the classroom, but you have to tell us that, right? So in your case, if you're a parent, like, we understand that's a 24-hour job, right? And so just being able to give us that context in that I wasn't able to do X, Y, and Z because my time was spent caring for my family and my newborn child, that's absolutely fine, because we absolutely understand that that because of that responsibility, you're unable to do other things, and that's perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. One here and then back there.
Yeah, I just somewhat so for the leadership part, can we include stuff that we're getting paid to do? I don't know if it,
Absolutely,
okay,
yeah.
Because I run a leadership program at work.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that
Absolutely, yeah. Anything that's paid or unpaid, absolutely. Like, you can absolutely put that. It doesn't have to be like an unpaid internship or nothing like that. Like, if you're doing something at work that's leadership worthy,
yeah.
you can absolutely talk about that. Mm-hmm.
So I actually want to maybe in accounting, but there's like not maybe the focus on
It's business, huh?
Yeah, so I just want to apply for the com. So in my application,
For economics. Yeah. Why don't you apply to Haas? I kind of know why.
yeah.
I'm asking you, but I kind of know why, right? Because Haas is competitive, and because econ is not as competitive as Haas. My response to you, if that's what you're thinking, is apply to Haas. If your heart is business and your intentions are accounting, don't let the numbers scare you away, right? Like, I understand that Haas is competitive, but at the end of the day, like, you may end up not even enjoying the economics major. Uh huh. Uh huh. Perfect. And that's something that you can include, and I think that's great, right? That you've thought about that, and that's what you should do, right? Is really think about that, because I see, and the reason why I say it is 'cause I see that a lot I hear that a lot. It's like, I want to do Haas, but I hear it's competitive, so I'm going to do econ, right? And I tell students, like, aim high, right? But if you already kind of have an idea of what you want to do and why econ's valuable to you, then absolutely strive for econ. And what you just said right now is something you can include in the responses, how econ is going to inform your work with accounting and what you want to maybe do in the future. That's absolutely great stuff to put in the application.
So you read the entire essay, like you don't skip anything.
We just read the first word, that's it. Yeah, we just have you write 30 to 50 words, and we read the first word, and, depending on what word you use, we admit you or not. Of course, we read the entire essay.
No, the reason I'm saying is, like, when I took my essays to my English professor, and she was saying, like, you need to have like a quote. If it's not interesting, they don't read the entire thing, and like I was really discouraged by that.
Yeah.
So that's why. Like,
No, not at all. And to be honest with you, like, there's a lot of misconceptions right out there, and the reality is that the next time you see that English instructor, you should ask them, how many times have you read for UC, because the hook, we read everything. Trust me, I've read some boring responses that I'm like, damn, I got to read this. and we read them word for word, it's not a hook, right? It's not like you're trying to. It's again that authenticity, right? Again, just think back to like when you might have read something and you felt it, you felt that passion. Even a song, right? Sometimes you're hearing a song and like you get emotional and you cry because you feel that person's energy. That's what we're looking for. So it's not so much a hook. It's more so like your energy, your authenticity, how you present yourself on the application. So we read every application word for word from beginning to end.
And if, some things are like they're not repeating exactly the same thing, but something very similar. Because like most of my time, like I spend more than like 20 hours tutoring different stuff.
Uh-huh.
So if I'm covering that in like different essays, that's okay, right?
Yeah, just as long as it's not repetitive. Correct. As long as it's not something that's repetitive or duplicating what you've already put in another response, you can absolutely talk about similar instances, just as long as, again, the important thing is you're giving us different contextual information that's not the same from another response. All right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate your time. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of you on Thursday the 7th for the PIQ reviews. So best of luck and go Bears.